Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your host, Brooke Walker, and excited again to be here today and talk to you a little bit about kind of a day in the life of a cult member. That's what we're going to do today. So, last episode, we talked about defining cults and the characteristics that make them up. Today I'm going to talk about like a typical day in my life during that time because it changed over the years. But at this time I'm 15, 16 years old. Things are getting really heated in the community. It's the beginning of when the lawsuits started, which I kind of reviewed the lawsuits a couple episodes ago. But at that age, let's say I'm 16 now, I think we could safely say that by this time. I work full time for my dad in his law office. I'm a paralegal assistant, receptionist, did billing, whatever needed to be done, I did that. I was going to school part-time, so I was going to college because I had already gotten my GED because I was pulled out of high school and told that I needed to begin to serve. And it was hit and miss for women to be able to go to school. So, and I was a straight A student before I was pulled out of school. So the idea was that I would either become a school teacher, which would have been for the school, or I would become a lawyer and work in the law firm, since those were kind of two of the major businesses we had. And I didn't dislike the idea of either of them. I also knew I had no choice. Like by then I was pretty firmly of the idea that I had to go along with things. And so I didn't fight things a lot, and I could see things that would be beneficial in either of those. Most of the community had moved up to outside the Payson area. My dad's law firm was still in Mesa, and there was still homes in Mesa. So we would do the commute, which was about a 2-hour commute, depending on, eventually they worked on the roads and it became an hour commute, but it was probably hour and 30 minutes, hour and 45 minutes, depending on the state of the roads and the people that you'd pass and what time on the weekend that you decided to go. And we would go up and down every weekend. But during the week, I had to clean the house down there, which the handful of men that still were down there in businesses. And some nights of the week, I was expected to cook. And on the weekends, I went out with my friends who were all still in high school. And so they were partying at like parties. And it's interesting too, because even at the time, I felt like, as much as it made no sense that all of my friends were still in school and I was not, and I was working full time, I had already had so much of this just feeling of just being beaten down about things that I didn't even question the fact that that's what I had to do. It was like it was coming from God, because it was coming from the ministers of the church, and I believed wholeheartedly that everything that was said that's how it was supposed to be. So, and I had been ingrained in it for 8 years, so I didn't know anything different. So we would go out on the weekends, and those were the times that I spent with my friends, and then the rest of the week it was working 40 plus hours. I say 40 plus hours because I don't really know how much I worked. I got paid like $25 a week, and that was expected to be used when I went out with my friends. So half the times I paid for everything on the weekends too, because half the time some of them couldn't get money. We were dirt poor because money was all done collectively, and there was not enough people who worked and made good money. My dad made great money. My dad was making 6 figures back then. But that doesn't go very far when you have as many people who weren't working. and that you're trying to keep houses and food over their head, even if you have 2 to 3 families in a home, which is the way it was. And even if you aren't doing like whole grocery shops. So they didn't, it's not like everybody went to the store and did a grocery shop, because there wasn't enough cars for everybody to do that anyway. So the way that it was that they would get groceries delivered. And I mean like how you would get a food truck to deliver to a restaurant. So they had an account through Kraft at the time, was the name of it. I think it's changed its name since then to something foods. But they would put in an order like it was for a restaurant, and it would get delivered. And then there was 2 different people who would put those grocery lists together every week. And then those grocery lists, and everything would get divvied out. So they would get these huge containers of chicken. They would get these huge containers, a case of apples and a case of bananas. And then we had a room that everybody could go to whenever they needed it, that had like all the basic like things that you would stock your cupboard with. Flour, sugar, powdered sugar, rice, like those, beans. So any of like major staples would be there, and you would go there whenever you needed to get that stuff. But all of the meat and the fruit and the vegetables would get delivered to your house every week. You didn't get to pick these. You got what you got. And they would do it based on how many people were in your home. And that had to be enough food to make dinners for everybody that lived with you for 7 days until you got your next box of food. And breakfast and lunch too, because there was a lot of women that were at home because they had small children, or because they were pregnant, or they did babysitting. And the women who stayed home and babysat were usually the women that were pregnant or had infants, and they would babysit for the women who didn't. And so the women who had a little bit older kids, the older kids went to school. So some of the women worked in the school. We had a sewing room. There was a business that they were sewing stuff, so some women would go sew. And then that was something that was always used as Christmas, baby showers. There was always, and anybody else who needed things clothing-wise. They didn't sew all the clothes. A lot of the clothes were bought. We were very Walmart looking and thrift store, you know what I'm saying? Except for the few people that had more jobs that needed something different, like my dad. He was an attorney. So the attorneys, they obviously dressed appropriately. But day to day, nobody, you might get some money to go buy some clothes for your birthday or a certain event. If you were a kid, you would probably get some clothes at Christmas time, because there was always very big Christmases. But other than that, like, things were slim, and like bills were paid, but there wasn't money for a lot extra. There was something called the shoe list. And it was, people would try to put their children on the shoe list if they needed shoes. Adults would try to get on the shoe list. Years later, I'm pretty sure that it came out that there was never an actual shoe list. If you just got lucky enough to ask for shoes on a day where there was an extra $100 in the bank account, then you'd probably get $20 to go buy some shoes. I mean, we're not talking anything great. So, and then a lot of the men worked in the different businesses that were in the church, which were the law firm. There was a construction business. And there was a handful of women, mostly some of the single women that worked waitressing at different places. One woman, she worked in taxes. People get jobs at the casino occasionally. I mean, nobody had real great jobs. And part of that was because they were controlled, and people who had different jobs were all of a sudden had to move to Payson. Payson was not a great area to get a job. So you typically worked within one of those places, and then financially everything was collectively done. So nobody had a personal experience with paying most of their own bills. Most of the people were not paying most of their bills, so they didn't have an actual understanding of how much money they made versus how much money they spent. And other than Trina and Stephen and their children, who always seemed to have a lot more money than anybody else, people were having a difficult time getting by, and there was not a lot of food. I mean, there was enough food, but there was not a lot of food, and there was no variety of food. So you would run out of a lot of the staples, and we didn't have a lot of spices. It was like salt, pepper, Italian seasonings, and chili powder and cumin. Those were all things that were staples. And then there was pasta, and there was like tomato sauces and stuff like that. So if you ran out of food, you were eating beans for the rest of the week, and you were eating pasta with a homemade tomato sauce that you basically made with tomato sauce and Italian seasoning. We ate a lot of goulash and beans. So they did eventually, at one point, there was a garden, like a huge garden was put in. But it never grew enough stuff. So there was a guy who his entire job was to take care of the garden. And I remember, I mean, my sister, she had little kids at the time. She's told me about going to the garden and stealing food for her kids, because you were not allowed to go to the garden and get food. You were only allowed to get food if he gave you food. So there had to be a surplus, and of course all food went to Trina and Stephen's house before it went to anybody else's house. So my sister used to sneak in and steal food. And I think there was chickens for a while too. So she would get eggs that way sometimes, because that was another thing that was often limited. So, and then, like, I want to tell you who I even lived with at the time. When I did live up there, I know I lived with my parents, but I can't tell you what family was with us, because we went through so many families living with us at any given time. There was a while that we were in one particular house, which was a central house right behind a barn. But we lived there with so many different people, I couldn't tell you at what time we lived with what people. So me and my dad would go to work. I'd work 40, 50 some hours a week. I just was with him all the time. So if he worked late, I worked late with him. I was fortunate during the time because I was with my dad, so oftentimes we would get food out. But when we got food out, it was still like, how do we keep this under $10, for a couple people? So it was very Taco Bell, like on a shoestring type of budget too. So we would come up, and I lived in this front room, and so many of these houses were summer homes, so they were like poorly constructed. Like the walls on the inside of the front room were different than the walls on the inside of the rest of the house. Like some of it had been textured and drywalled, and some of it was, wood paneling. And a lot of it didn't match because somebody had thrown this house together with all the materials they had. And most of the houses were like that, which means they didn't hold heat very well in the winter, and they could be pretty hot in the summer, but it was a pretty nice area, so the summer wasn't bad. But the winters could be really uncomfortably cold. So we're living in this house. I'm in this front bedroom. 2 or 3 other people in the room. So I want to assume that it was my sister, at least, my baby sister, because my older sister's married and has kids by now. And anybody older than me at this time probably was married and starting a family. Because at 16 years old, almost everybody, if you were not getting married and having kids by 16, 17, 18, 19, then you were way behind. So I was expecting it soon. And so we go up one weekend, and I wake up in the morning. It's still dark out. and I am in excruciating pain and I can't walk. And I wanted to yell for my parents, and I think that I tried to say their name a couple times, but again, I'm in this long bedroom and there's other beds next to me of other kids, so I don't want to wake up anybody else. So I began to like almost army crawl, because I could barely even crawl on my knees, to my parents' room, which was not exactly that close. And I finally like get to their room and push their door open, and I'm sobbing because I'm in so much pain for no reason. I'm just in this excruciating pain down my legs. And I wake up my mom and I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I can't walk and I'm in a ton of pain. So they get me back to my room. I think she probably gave me Advil or something for pain relief. And it slowly got better. I was hobbling around for a while. And then after that, I get these, around the same time, I had these huge red bumps, like all over my breasts and my nipples. Like these crazy, almost blister-like. And as the day progressed, my mom was talking to other women and found out that several of my friends had it too. And so I think I had it the worst, but everybody had a version of it. And pain in the feet. Not everybody had the difficulty walking that I did, but pain in the feet, and then these strange blistery red, almost like bug bite all over our chests. And so there ends up being a trance about it. And Duran comes through, and it takes him a few minutes, and then he says, "You've been poisoned." And at the time, it hadn't been the first person who had been poisoned in the community. Stephen had been poisoned and had horrible vertigo for a long time. And they believed that he was at a bar, because they used to go out around that time. They were going to the Double D, they were going to Diamond Point, local bars in the area, and drinking around the community. And then sometime after that, their daughter Summer had been poisoned. And she had been taken to the hospital because she had been drinking and had gotten so sick that she was vomiting profusely. And it wasn't a drinking thing. She hadn't had that much to drink. And with her, they think that it had been Visine. I guess the effects she had, they guessed that it was Visine. So Duran says, we've been poisoned. We never actually went to the doctor or the hospital, so I never had that verified that way. And we took word that it was. It was always very strange to me, though. Later on, my feet had these, like on the sole of my feet, I had this, first I had all these dark speckly spots. And then it like came out, and it was like actually as my skin kind of came out, it came out through my skin, which doesn't happen very quickly on your feet, and I had this like speckly weird spots, and I had all these parts where it's like my skin was raw. And I never found out any more from that. Duran had said at the time that you don't remember what happened to you. You don't remember who did it. I will tell you, to this day, that bothered me at the time, and it still does. Now, I don't know when it had happened. I don't doubt that I was poisoned. I just don't understand when or how, because there was many times we went out and I would never eat anything because Jessica would always take whatever money we had and buy her salt, and she would always eat, and half the time we would drink beers. So I never ate when we went out. Yeah, I would have a beer, but I always popped all my beers myself. So it never quite made sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me, and I almost didn't share this story because I don't even know how to put that into context in my life, that I was poisoned when I was 16 because of living in a cult. But here we are. Part of the reason I decided to share that today is to give context, because people often wonder, why don't you leave? Why didn't you leave? There was abuse, there was cruelty, there was physical abuse, which I didn't have, like I shared when we were teenagers, and that level. At that time, I felt like, well, I was a teenager and I was doing things I shouldn't do. So I didn't see it as physical abuse at the time, but there was plenty of incidents like that. So I want to talk about, the other thing I'm going to talk about besides like a day of the life in is, why didn't I leave? And why people don't leave. And I think it's a very valid question, and really understandable that people are wondering, like, why would you stick around? Obviously, this was horrible. Obviously, there's better things out there. So let's dive into why people stay in cults. Because if you've ever had a family member in one, I'm sure you have thought, why can't you see what everybody else sees? It's valid. Why can't you see what everybody else sees? And let's talk about why people can't. So first of, cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you have conflicting beliefs, and so you try to make them make sense together, and you're rationalizing them. So in a cult, you have all these different beliefs, and the only way to rationalize them is, the people that I'm here with, like, obviously they love me, and all of this to make it make sense, obviously it's my fault. So me taking myself somewhere else isn't going to do any good, because I'm the one that's the problem. Like, that's one of the ways that you begin to make sense of it. It's a lot of devaluing yourself. And by the age of 16, I had already devalued myself in so many different ways. Like, I did not see myself for who I was at all. So to me, to get out of that, why would I get out of that? And then the outside environment. So we're looking at this outside environment, and I'm just looking at it from a critical standpoint. Not that I have a lot of critical thinking at the time, but I'm not dumb. And what I see outside of us is horrible. People randomly poisoning us. Multiple people, death threats. And a lot of these people, I'm being told that these are good Christian people. So I obviously am thinking, well, fuck Christians. Obviously, I wouldn't want anything to do with that. If these are good Christian people who are so hateful and cruel, I don't want to be a part of that. Now, on top of that, I have a complete lack of awareness. I think that where I am is better, because everything I'm seeing is supporting that. And I've been, the other thing is, you're isolated. So you're isolated from everything outside. So it doesn't, and let me explain being isolated. There was a lot of us that had jobs outside of that. And I worked in my dad's office, so I was always coming in contact with people. We watched TV. The newspaper got delivered on a regular basis. So there was this awareness of all this stuff going on, but that level of contact didn't mean that there were any beneficial relationships. So, which leads to the next one. I don't have enough connections outside of me. The only people that I know are family members that I've been told my entire life that they're not very good people. Stay the fuck away from them. So then the next thing that's outside is like friends, which I've never developed any deep, meaningful relationships because I'm told that I have everything here. So I'm very dependent on everybody around me who is my immediate family members and my friends I've grown up with for the last 8 years. And then my faith. So the idea of leaving that, it's like, and go where and do what? And I have no financial means. I have absolutely, I'm completely dependent. I've never paid a bill, as I probably wouldn't have. Most 16-year-olds haven't. And this doesn't get better as I get older, you guys, because I just become more dependent. I mean, eventually it did. But so I have no money. I don't have a bank account. I don't know how to do half of that stuff. I've been psychologically manipulated my entire life, so I've been brainwashed. I don't have critical thinking because of the amount of fear that I have. And let me explain something about fear. And this is where brainwashing and manipulation goes to a completely different level that I don't think people understand. Like, I wish that there was videos of some of the incidents that happened, because it's like so hard to really explain the depth of how it gets under your skin. The leaders of this cult, and really Stephen Camp, could completely turn something on you. And he taught, and Trina could do it, and their kids learned how to do it, where they could turn a situation against you that initially you thought one way, and next thing you know, your entire world is turned upside down and you throw it all out the window. So if you had ever hinted that maybe you shouldn't be there for some reason, like maybe you didn't provide well enough for the community, or there was some reason that the way that you gave wasn't worthy, and so maybe you should spare yourself by leaving and spare the community of your meager soul that's not worthy of their faith or whatever. If you were to ever utter something along those lines, you would have the entire thing turned on you about being in your ego, and that you need to serve more, and that you need to pray more, and that you don't love God enough, and you're not listening, and you're not learning vicariously, and what's wrong with you, and what would that do to the people here that depend on you. So there's not a subject you couldn't bring up that would not get turned on you in a way that you would just feel completely like it was your fault. So if you ever had a thought of doing something, you would have to have been completely silent about it and planned in silence to do it. And that is what a ton of people do when they're in a cult. But the other thing is, in doing that, you have to decide you're leaving everybody behind. So I would have had to decide I was leaving every friend that I had known for most of my life. I had no friends from before, and I had no friends outside of the cult. I would have had to decide to leave my entire family behind. My parents, my siblings. Assuming that I could have done this before 18. My dad was an attorney. He would have absolutely found me, and he would have made me come back until the age of 18. So, and I would have had to leave my faith behind at the time. And like, this is not your standard run-of-the-mill Christian faith. This is, we are the best and we are the only, and we're not particularly mainstream. Like, and specific churches do this sometimes too, but if you go to a Christian church or a specific, and I'm just using Christian because it's common, not to name that out in any particular way, but if you go to a mainstream type of church, you can typically find another church to go to for whatever reason. You're not letting go of your entire belief system and your faith. But In a cult, you are. For you to leave that, you have to leave that. You have to leave your faith. It would be like it would be like joining witness protection. You have to become another person and lose everything that you had. Everything. You get to take nothing with you. Probably not even most of your belongings, because you're not going to get out with them. And that is what people do. There are so many people that do it. And just to explain how bad, unless you had a huge enough falling out that they would almost get rid of you. And people who did leave were ostracized. So when somebody left, nobody ever talked to you again. And I remember over the years, this family would leave and that family would leave, and they would be bad-mouthed about their lack of spirituality, about their lack of everything. I mean, and other lies about who they were as people and the incidents that had led them to leave. And nobody ever knew the truth, because most of it was stuff that happened with the ministers and them. Now, everything else was always public all the time. But when somebody left, you never really knew why. You never really heard the whole story. And you were just like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, well, we're probably never going to talk to them again. And it was just like they were gone. And this could be somebody that you had been friends with for a very long time. And then they were out. And that was it. So if you can think of other reasons why people don't leave cults and you want to comment on this, please do. Or you can always DM me through social media. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons. I don't think people understand how mentally difficult it is. And the fear and manipulation thing, the other part of that is when you're in this environment, you're in a constant fight or flight, which means you're not using any critical thinking skills anyway. You don't have the ability to use your critical thinking skills because you're being told all the time all the things that are wrong with you. So you're constantly in a fear spiral. You are living in constant anxiety and torment. And then we're drinking and smoking on top of all of that. And when you're in fight or flight, one of the first things that happen is your brain turns off. Your brain turns off. So I may have shared this on another episode, but if I did, you get to hear it again. So we have a little almond shape thing called an amygdala. It's in the back of our brains. And what this does is this tells your body when you're under stress what needs to be put out. So it's like a little thing that signals to tell your body that you need more cortisol or all these different things. So it literally under stress will tell your body the things that need to be turned on or turned off. So if you're in fight or flight, and this works like a light switch, when it's turned on, you begin to sweat more, your heart rate goes up, your brain turns off, your reproduction turns off, your digestion turns off, and all of these work less efficiently. And it's because at the time it's so that you can survive, which means get out of a situation or fight your way out of a situation, right? So it's, fighting a bear or running away from a bear. But under really stressful trauma or being in a traumatic environment, this doesn't turn off. It's just on all the time, which means you're not critically thinking. You're not digesting food correctly. You're just under undue amounts of stress for long periods of time. Too much cortisol, too much adrenaline, all the time. And there's a lot of things that can help with that. But when it happens over a long period of time, it's the reason you're not able to think. And I absolutely 100% believe We were put under the stress we were put under and put at odds with each other constantly to keep us in for as long as possible so that eventually they could get to my grandparents' money and all the other families they were trying to get to the money. And if you keep people stressed out and in inner turmoil all the time where you're like, oh my God, what did I do? Oh my God, what did I do? And you're just like consistently spiraling, which is what was going on, then you're never thinking, I need to get out of this, because you're always trying to beat yourself up of what you've done to yourself and what you've done to your family. So that's why people don't leave. But again, if you have other reasons why you know that somebody doesn't leave, or if there's anything I didn't answer completely, please reach out, ask me a question. Hope this episode was helpful, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye-bye.